have you mainly been using the cattle on the land to focus specifically on repairing the land, or are you also seeing the gains that you would like with your cattle?
Well, you've got to balance it out, and that's one of the problems that Alan Savory had when he first got started, because a lot of people went in and they just stepped off the edge of the world and just went whole hog on this, and they didn't. They were going just as a tool for the land, and their cattle didn't do worth a darn. So what we're having to do is we're needing to balance those two out to where you can get your animal performance plus be getting your soil being built and bringing in your perennial grasses back at the same time. And that's where you're not actually hurting. This is what people seem to want to think, is that we're going out there and we're spending every day with these cows and all day with them to make them graze in one point or another. But in reality, it's going ahead and changing the way that we handle the cattle, the way we approach them, to where they just all of a sudden just start wanting to be together. And it only, about 4 or 5 days of doing it continuously, then you only need to go out there every couple of days, or in some cases a week or two. That picture on the top of the website there, the guy, we did that school in January, or not, excuse me, not January. We did that school in August, and the 1st of October, he took off on a 9-day vacation, and when he got back, that's how his cows were grazing. So it's something that actually will stick with your cows, and as long as you go out there and once a week, once every other week, depending on how your situation is and your land, that land there was not real rugged, so they can see each other and they don't get split up. If you're on real rough ground or real brushy ground, you may need to put a little bit more effort into it. But it's something where they start acting as a herd, and they will come together tight when they need to come together tight, or when the land will allow them and the feed will allow them to come in together real tight. They'll come in together and be grazing inches from each other. But then if you go into a spot where you've got a little bit of brush there, as Zach remember when we went down to Mexico, down to Fernando Falamir's place, there were places in there where they had to spread out because of the brush, but then when they come out of the brush, they'd come back together. And in those cases where they do have to spread out a little bit, they will find a spot where they can all bed down together at night, and then you start getting a lot of impact and a lot of grasses growing where you really couldn't have done it without that impact. I wish I would have.
We have, Bob, we do have one question coming up that I think is really interesting, and I'd like to have you speak to it a little bit. And it's talking about a varying age across your cow herd. If you are an operation that, say it's for backgrounding calves or developing heifers, and you have 2 separate herds, what's some of the behavioral action of when you turn those calves back in with their moms back out there on the range? I mean, is it something that kind of sticks with them as throughout their lives?
Yeah, it will. It does stick with them.
Okay.
And it was when I filmed that Stockmanship 101, I used the friend's cows, and he's down here in the desert, and I mean, it was a bunch of Coriani cross cows, and they were getting ready to have their first calf, and I did the video, and then I left, and he did not didn't do anything with them for a year. He's one of these guys that drives out with a cake truck, throws out a little bit of cake once in a while, and just make sure the water's going. And a year later is when he decided to brand the calves, and we went out there, and they were kind of scattered out, but as soon as they saw us coming, they just started going in together. and then joining in with other cattle, and would get down to the water. And the calves, rather than being wild, and I mean, you're out here, you're in the desert, you've got brushy places. These are all the conditions that people say that cattle, it makes cattle wild. And yet we went down into that brush. I started them up out of the brush, and those calves were coming up and sniffing my horse to see what it was. So all of these things that we look at, we go, well, our cattle are wild because of one thing or another. Usually our cattle are wild because of us. It isn't the terrain, it isn't the brush, it isn't the open country, you know, it isn't because they can see us coming from a mile away. In fact, you start getting these cattle working like this, and if you ride straight to them where they can see you, they will turn and start coming towards you as you're on your way there, which that makes gathering a lot easier too.
Yeah. Well, and kind of what I'm taking away from your discussion about this is it's not just a hard and fast rule of how you work cattle through a cattle handling facility. You know, this is an approach that's, you're looking long term. You want to teach your cows to find the answer that you're asking them of. And it's something that they're going to be able to apply out there within whatever size pasture or paddock or rangeland that you've got them on, because it's more of a philosophy that you teach them, so to speak, about grazing, rather than a practice that you implement out there on the land. So that's, I really
exactly. And it's not even teaching the cow this. The cattle have it in them to be as a herd. I mean, it's basically, they call it herd instinct because it is their instinct to be as a herd, but we don't see them as a herd because we do so much that goes against their instinct that they don't have any idea of being as a herd, because every time they get put together, it's a stressful situation. And it's like feeding. If you take and instead of going out and calling those cows in to feed, and then once they get there, you start driving around and dropping your cake or throwing your hay. If you can take and put that hay out without them knowing about it, and instead of putting it out in one line or one circle, put it out in several short lines where they can actually spread out when they hit it, and either take them to it, or what I've been doing here recently on this deal, because I've started feeding some hay, trying to, on one group of cows on top of last year's tumbleweeds, to get them knocked down and open it up and get some barley seed into the ground. I wait till they go to water. I go in and I feed, and then I leave, and then they come back and they find the feed. So there's absolutely no stress involved around feeding time. And I've had people say that it actually adds at least a quarter pound of a day to their gain on their calves when they wean them, because you'll have them in the pens for 2, maybe 3 days, and then you're out. And what guys that are taking, they say if they do it that way, that it's adding, you know, it may take them 45 minutes longer to feed, but it's also adding a quarter pound a day, so on their gain. So that quarter pound, if you've got 100 calves, you're putting an extra 25 pounds a day on, which, you know, that kind of makes that extra 45 minutes worth it. Was there another question there? Or?
Well, yeah, and it seems to me as though there's a multi-fold here of the benefit, because you have cattle that are a little better to handle every time. You've got people that probably are a little easier to work with every time because the cattle are working better. But then we also realize the value that they're triggering within our natural resource base as well. I mean, it sounds like you're seeing a shift in plant community to more desirable and productive species, as well as, you know, what's above ground is only a mirror of what's below. So you're seeing
absolutely
health improve and resiliency across the landscape rebooted, just like the herd instinct of the cattle.
Yeah, exactly. You're hitting everything most like that. And I actually, whenever I'm doing anything, you know, if I say, okay, I need to, if figure I need to build a fence or I need to start feeding, whatever I'm doing, I'm looking at it as something that's going to solve two things at once. Uh, it's I had a project out in California last summer, and it's the whole place is one pasture,
Okay.
and then they have a 67-acre trap alongside an 8,000-acre pasture that's the ranch, and I want them to build a fence down the one end of it and divide that in half and put a water rod in there for you could just go in there and take those cattle into water and then kick the cows out on one side, and by the time they get to the water lot, they're split, they're weaned, they don't even know they've been weaned. And they didn't do it that way. I got out there to do a school, and they go, well, we're going to wean these calves first. And we figured that, the fencing that I had them was going to have them build was maybe 4 miles with a water rod in it, and only 3 wire with a hot wire in the middle. It was going to run them around $7,000, and they lost at least that much in shrink just because of the way they set things up, and was overcrowded on the pens and had to leave the calves in the pens an extra day before they could turn them out. It just, if you do your infrastructure right, it makes it simple, and you can keep everything calm all the way through and really never have much stress on these cattle at all or on your health.
Yeah.
And
stress on
if I'm going to feed, I'm going to look at that feed as part of that has got to be doing something to improve the soil. I'll pick where I'm going to feed. If I've got a draw that's starting to erode, I'm going to go over and I'm going to feed back and forth across that draw just to get the impact in there and get more plants building into there to slow down the water and stop the erosion. And it's all things that it should be obvious, but most of us don't think about it. And even if we do think about it, we're looking at the same thing all the time, and sometimes we overlook things on our own places that we'd notice right off the bat if we're on somebody else's.
Mm-hmm. So speaking a little bit to that, Bob, what's the typical approach that you take? I mean, if somebody was interested in having you out to their place, what do you like to do? Do you do a phone call, or do they send you an email? Or
yeah, they can call, email, Facebook chat, and whenever I do it, it's a 5-day program. The 5th day is as much observation of the cattle as anything, and just discussing back of how they were behaving at the beginning of this and how they're behaving now, and trying to make sure everybody's got their approaches down. Because I've got people that have done this and gone, and they'll call me a year later because they'll figure out something a little bit different. But it's something that once you get started on it, you can keep going with it. And it's the first day I'll start out. I've been known to have these schools horseback at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I've kind of changed it where I don't go back into lunch anymore, because sometimes it's hard to get people to leave and go back out. So we'll pack lunch and water, and we'll stay out with the cattle. And the first day is we're basically just learning the approaches and suggesting that the cattle go to water at the same time, because you can't have a true herd situation going on. If part of the cattle want to drink at 8 in the morning, and then some at 10, and some come back in at noon. It doesn't mesh together into a herd. So we get all these coming in, and then we don't let them leave. We hold them there on water until everything's about ready to go out and graze. Then we'll use the different approaches to get them to head out to feed. And sometimes we can use a natural barrier to slow them down, or we'll get out there in front of them and slow them down a little bit until they start grazing. Then we leave them alone, come back the next day and start over. Generally by the 3rd day, we're able to go out a little bit later, because everything's heading into water on their own at the right time.
Yeah. So, and then just to reiterate, it looked like kind of the final question coming in here. And the question is relating to, the application of this in diverse ecosystems. So could you just give us another rundown of, how far north, south, east, and west have you been able to deploy this practice?
Well, I've done it from Montana to Australia.
Yeah, that's a pretty good spot.
It really doesn't, because you're just creating herd instinct, rebooting that herd instinct, and then the cattle are going ahead and they're doing the work. Now, if you've got really rough country, yeah, you're going to need to get out there and kind of make sure that they're going up the same draw, going up the same ridge. They should be coming back down to water at about the same time. If you've got a creek and a riparian system, yeah, then the thing to do is to get up there when they're coming down to water and just divert them to where they're going to drink at a different spot every day. Mm-hmm. Or every other day, and then you can send them back up a different ridge or something, or valley, and once they're heading up there, you can let them go, and then the next day or the day after that, catch them as they're coming down to have them go ahead and water it at a different place. And you can, I mean, as Zach will remember, old Fernando's had some places that were so brushy when they started, they couldn't even ride through it hardly with a horse. And he tells this story about, or his dad tells the story of, they had cattle in this one area that they knew that the cows were in there, and they went in there with 4 or 5 cowboys, and they come up the other end, and they didn't have a single cow.
Wow.
So he, after 2 passes through there, it was like, no, we're wasting our time to go back to the house. And he spent the night taking and soaking cotton balls in diesel, and then he just went up around, started riding around one side of that, just slacking those cotton balls and throwing them in there and setting the place on fire. Went around to the other side, and the cattle came out, and they had like 120 head in there. And they got rid of those wild ones, and now you can actually ride a horse through that place. It's still brushy, but you can actually ride your horse through there without killing yourself. And the cows go in there, graze, come out, and it's pretty interesting that it was mainly all mesquite, but now he's got some different types of trees that are coming out in there that are actually native to that area. So it's a little bit different every place you go. It works every place you go. It's just like anything else. If you're going to jump into a Dodge pickup and you drive that, it works. You jump into a Ford pickup, and I mean, every one of them, the start button's in a different place. There's little differences in there, but they still operate basically the same.
You bet, Bob. Well, I sure appreciate you joining us today and sharing a little bit about what you've got going on with the migratory grazing.
Oh, I enjoyed it. This has been kind of fun trying to get this all set up and everything.
Well, now we've got it set up, so we'll have to host you again on another webinar coming up, and we'll do it in a little different platform where we can actually have producers in on the Zoom call with you, and we can be all kind of in more of an open discussion, talking about all the funny stuff that our cows do.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
All right. Thank you, Bob. You have a great day, and say hello to the family. I hope you all are doing well.
Oh, we are.
Okay.
And you have a Merry Christmas.
Yep,
Thank you.
You as well. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.